of our Bible reading this morning from Acts chapter 2, I want to draw your attention to what the writer, Luke, says about the people. He says, "And the Lord added to their number day by day," or some of your translations say daily, "those who were being saved." The Lord adds to the church on a daily basis, day by day, those who are willing to accept salvation, that free from God. Today I want to give credit where credit's due. This is not an original sermon, although I've put my own thoughts and my own twist on it. But Kate saw this from a mutual friend who's, I believe, now preaching in Alabama. Used to preach in Columbus, Ohio, and he shared a slideshow on Facebook that intrigued us and inspired this sermon. But I thought about this. I was thinking about this, and drawing attention to ourselves is something that is rather easy to do. Human nature is basically that, at least to some point, we all want to be noticed and appreciated for who we are and what we've accomplished, right? That's human nature. We do something right, we want to be appreciated for that. Turn with me to what Solomon says, though, cautioning that human nature that is in us. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 27, Solomon cautions us to exercise self-control in that area of our lives. Solomon says, "Let another praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips." In other words, what Solomon is saying is, let someone else evaluate your worth, your efforts. You ever heard someone bragging about their accomplishments? I mean, from time to time, I think everybody does it in their own way. But oftentimes there are those who simply, they want to brag about their accomplishments to draw attention to themselves. And we need to be cautious about that, because we can, as the saying goes, we can be tooting our own horn. And drawing attention to ourselves is not necessarily something we should do. Solomon made that quite clear there in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 2. You know, as an example of this, I am pretty oblivious to things around me. I really am. I think part of it's just being a guy. We have our own set of focus, and anything around us, the world could be in total chaos. As long as what our personal focus is still ahead of us. You know, I could walk in the house and I might notice it if the living room is completely rearranged, but I seldomly notice that the floor is swept, the dishes are done. I seldomly notice those things. And so I think that's being a guy thing. So Kate has started either sending me a text message or giving me a call. "Tom, when you come home, you need to notice what the children have done today." And then she'll give me a list of things that I should notice. And that's simply because, otherwise the children, Esther the other day, she just couldn't hardly contain herself. I came home early. I did not have my list. Esther's like, "Papa, do you notice the kitchen?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's there." She's like, "Did you see the floor?" "Yeah, I walked on it." She's like, "It's clean." I'm like, "Oh yeah, thank you, Esther. That looks really nice." And in all reality, I didn't see a bit of it. But Esther did it, and she wanted to feel noticed and appreciated for that. And so, again, I appreciate my wife letting me know what I'm supposed to appreciate in life. And but And it avoids those situations where my children have to come and draw attention to themselves, and it helps them to be appreciated, to feel appreciated without actually having to draw attention to themselves. So, Mama has had many, many conversations with the children on Papa's obliviousness and how I don't see a lot of things. But Kate has pretty well decided that men in general, have you ever noticed, ladies, that your husband works better when you're there to applaud his accomplishments? Kate has decided that all men need their own cheerleading squad of some sort. And it's kind of true. We really kind of do. We need to feel appreciated. It motivates us to greater levels. So this kind of just to give you the human nature aspect of this. Something occurred to me in thinking about that human nature aspect and what my friend posted that Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 6. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing something and being appreciated for it. But Jesus, in Matthew chapter 6, gives us a group of people. He's talking to a group of people who were so accustomed to drawing attention to themselves. Look at what he says, Matthew chapter 6. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward of your Father who is in heaven. Oh, that's interesting. Where's our faith? Are we doing this every Sunday? So, oh yeah, people see me walking into that little teeny tiny building on 2nd Street in Marietta. Or is it, well, if I'm not there, Tom might announce that we don't know where so-and-so's at this morning. We do that because we appreciate you, we miss you when you're not around. But what is actually motivating us? Jesus says thus, when you practice your faith, thus when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you. Now, I'm not accustomed to carrying a trumpet in my hip pocket. But I'll tell you what, there's something else that we do carry. Sometimes we carry a cell phone with us. We feel the need to let everybody know what we're doing, how we're doing it. Oh, yes, we did this wonderful thing. And again, to a certain extent, there's no need to be ashamed to do that because people need to see good. But Jesus says, thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites. The word hypocrite here means an actor, one who acts in a play. An actor is not really living the role. He's one who's merely acting it out. Do in the synagogues and in the streets. In other words, someone who wants to be noticed is going to draw attention to what they're doing, that they may be praised of others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Oh, how very interesting. Jesus puts that into perspective, doesn't he? You see, the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious of Jesus' day, had slid into this entrapped position that, quite frankly, I think would be very easy for us to slide into today, particularly preachers. Myself. Okay, I have been told that I am not a good self-promoter. Okay? But you know what? I don't like promoting myself. There are times when I'll go to religious meetings and stuff, and someone said, well, you need to always carry a business cards with you and put those out. I'm not always comfortable doing that. On the other hand, I have no problem carrying a card with me into Lowe's and passing them out, inviting people to come to church. It's just a difference. Sometimes promoting the congregation is different than promoting oneself. God is the creator of the universe. But do you realize that God only wrote 10 commandments out of the whole Bible? That's all he actually put in writing. God's finger wrote 10 commandments out of the entire Bible. Here's something else. Can't you imagine Jesus with his disciples taking a selfie, posting it, flipping it up on Facebook? Okay, I was very hesitant to use this slide because I don't like to put pictures of Jesus in. But this is something like what it might have been. You know, they're at the Sea of Galilee and they're all out here doing the selfie thing. You know, and then they go on Facebook. Look what we did. We healed 10 lepers today. But Jesus has been loved and worshiped for centuries. But Jesus himself didn't write a single word of the Gospels regarding himself and his actions. Jesus didn't write anything. Or couldn't you see Jesus while he's carrying the cross up Calvary's hill? Ha, look what I'm doing for you today. Selfie, right on Facebook. You know, the selfie's pretty good. I think its name says it all. There's a focal point to a selfie. And again, I'm not opposed to selfies. But there's a focal point to selfies. And a lot of times I receive updates from preachers who are overseas, Africa, the Philippines, sometimes in South America. I'll receive these, and I appreciate that they want to document where they've been, what they're doing. And so sometimes we see those selfies, and they come across. Some of them are a little bit goofy. But, we appreciate that we know that if we financially support those individuals, we know that they're doing the will of God. And sometimes a selfie helps to get that across. But again, for our contemplation this morning, the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 2 and in verse 3 says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only on his own interest, but also the interest of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus." In other words, we should be quick to make sure that we appreciate what others do. Even if our wives have to send us a checklist, it would be good if we appreciate what others do around us. Now again, from time to time, I think selfies are great. They're kind of cool. My wife and I go somewhere, sometimes she does a selfie with the two of us in it. Nothing wrong with that. It reminds us of a good time that we had together. But selfies could also turn into that selfish ambition that Paul is talking about in drawing attention to ourselves. Think about this. Moses' mother. And what about Moses at the burning bush? Can you imagine that? What a selfie. Burning bush in the background. God's talking to me. Imagine if Moses had taken those selfies. But then who would Moses have written about? Would Moses' writings have been about the great accomplishments? And what would his account of the Red Sea have been like if Moses had a selfish ambition? In fact, at the end of his life, Joshua wrote in the last book of Moses, in the book of Deuteronomy, right after Moses died, he wrote in there, Joshua wrote in that book as it closed, that there was never a more humble man in all the earth. I'm paraphrasing. Never a more humble man in all the earth than God's servant Moses. It's one of the only parts of that book that Moses didn't write himself, and it was regarding him. I want to go back to it, though, because Moses did this once. Moses did draw attention to himself on one occasion. in the book of Numbers, which we're studying on Wednesday night. So we'll get here at some point on Wednesday night, Numbers chapter 20. If you look up the great sin of Moses, you can Google it, you find all kinds of answers. And I always heard it was all because Moses struck the rock instead of speaking to him. I want you to read God's response. Numbers chapter 20, and in verse 10. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice. And water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, look at what he says. This is the problem. Because you did not believe in me to uphold. Your King James is going to be sanctify me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel. Therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. What did Moses not do? He took forefront. He says, must we bring water for you? Indicating that there was some power in him and Aaron. You see, that was Moses' sin. If Moses had been into selfies and self-promotion, he could have self-promoted a great deal. But his punishment for self-promotion, and not even a big portion of self-promotion, was that he forgot to give God the glory, to sanctify God in the eyes of the people. He elevated himself and Aaron, his brother, by saying, must we? What about Daniel in the lion's den? Couldn't you see Daniel? I mean, what a picture that would be. Facebook totally worthy. God's people have never been instructed to draw attention to themselves or their faith, really. Daniel drew a great amount of attention. But that attention, he always turned and focused on his God. Daniel would walk in and he would be very careful when he spoke to Nebuchadnezzar and say, the God of heaven, the God of Israel, has made known the answer to this dream. Never did he bring the focus on himself. In fact, it's quite the opposite for the Christian today. 1 Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and in verse 11, the Apostle Paul says this. And to aspire. Let me back up a little bit. Verse 9. Now concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write to you. For you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another. For that indeed is what you are doing to all the brothers throughout Macedonia. But we urge you, brothers, to do this more and more, and to aspire to live quietly, and to mind your own affairs, and to work with your hands, as we instructed you, so that you may walk properly before outsiders and depend on no one. There's so much packed into that little verse right there by the Apostle Paul. But for today's study, the Apostle Paul says to live quietly and to mind your own business. Sometimes while I'm on social media and I appreciate the amount of use that this congregation makes out of social media, Sometimes I think the world was a better place before social media ever existed. Because what that really does is it gives us the opportunity to be completely and totally up in each other's lives. Looking at what the other person's having for dinner is not on my agenda. And drawing attention to ourselves is certainly not what God's people should necessarily do. Some of the hardest working people in this congregation don't necessarily get the credit they deserve. You guys do so much out there for this body of believers. And I think this goes for Christians all over the world. You know, I bought a package of light bulbs and then never changed them. Came in the other night, the lights are all lit. I don't know what kind of fairy does that, but I heard it was a fairy with a 10-foot step ladder. You know, we'll come in sometimes, the building's clean. I don't put the sermons on YouTube or Facebook. There's so much out there. The grass. I don't remember the last time I cut the grass. You know, there's so much that gets done behind the scenes that no one really gets the credit that they really truly deserve. But then neither did Noah. I mean, you know, Noah, he saved all of God's created creatures on the ark and his family. Noah was a preacher of righteousness, but Noah was not into self-promotion. The Bible says he found favor in the sight of God. I've got some closing thoughts. Let's just be careful. Again, nothing wrong with selfies, nothing wrong with social media per se. But let's be careful of what our motivation is behind us. Do we want people to notice us, to pay attention to us because we are valuable? Or do we want people to look past us and say, we are just doing this because God has motivated us? Let's shift that focus a little bit. Take it off of ourselves and put the focus on Him. Let's bring attention to our God because He is an awesome God. You know, the truth is, you might not actually be that good. And maybe your accomplishments aren't that great. Because there's always somebody out there who could do it better than I could. There's always, believe me, I've been all over the place. I've been to preacher training classes, men's studies. There are preachers out there that are 10 times better than I am and do a much better job representing the gospel than I do. I'm really not that great. And I think sometimes when we draw attention to ourselves, it can backfire on us. And people really actually realize, he said, what? The Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1 says, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, and the list goes on. But lovers of self. Think of ourselves. What do we think of ourselves? I'll tell you what I am. I am just somebody that is trying to bring glory and honor and praise to God because He's brought so much into my life. and He's done so much for me. If you're here this morning, you find yourself subject to the invitation, why don't you take out your songbook, turn to the song that's been selected, Only a Step. That's all it is. One step. One step. We take one step forward, then we're going in the right direction. If you're here today and you're subject to the invitation, won't you let us know how we can help you? As together